There are 15 Pokemon species that are derived from fossils in the Pokemon universe, which is crazy, really. Fossils are such a memorable part of the Pokemon experience, but they aren't even represented in every generation. Gen 1 introduced 3 fossils along with the original 151 Pokemon: Kabuto, Ammonite, and Aerodactyl. Then Generation 2 had no new fossils. Gen 3 brought Laleep and Anorith, Gen 4, Cranidos and Shieldon, Gen 5, Tortuga and Arcan, Gen 6 had Tyrunt and Amara, there were no new fossils in Sun and Moon, and then Gen 8 had the most fossils of any generation, these goobers, and Gen 9 had none. Pokemon introduced fossils to the trading card game in the aptly named Fossil expansion, the third in Pokemon TCG history, and have been tweaking the fossil formula ever since. With a new round of fossil Pokemon cards being printed in the Scarlet and Violet generation, and more support on the way in Pitch Black this summer, I thought it would be a great time to look back at the history of the fossil mechanic in the Pokemon TCG and talk about the things that worked and the things that didn't. Before we get started, I want to give a quick shout out to my sponsor, Full Grip Games. I've been partnered with Full Grip since 2018, and I wouldn't be able to create the content that I do without their support. They have an amazing selection of Pokemon trading card game singles available in-store and online at fullgripgames.com. Their knowledgeable staff provides amazing customer service, and they're always hosting exciting tournaments for the community to enjoy, not just in person, but also streamed here exclusively on Tricky Gym. Full Grip is always buying bulk and singles as well. So if you have extra cards lying around that you'd like to turn into cash or store credit, it's super easy to submit a buy list on fullgripgames.com. Thank you so much for supporting the channel by buying and selling Pokemon cards at fullgripgames.com. In the video games, fossil Pokemon have to be restored from a fossil that is discovered somewhere in the game. A player will come across a strange item and take it to a research lab, then, holy crap, the researchers Frankenstein the fossil to life, and you're free to take it home and battle it with your other monsters. To emulate this in the Pokemon trading card game, fossil Pokemon have always had to evolve from a trainer card, which is different than how every other Pokemon evolution works, and inherently, evolving your Pokemon from a trainer card comes with some problems. Problems that, 30 years later, the game designers are still trying to solve. In the Fossil expansion, Pokemon debuted the mysterious Fossil Trainer card. Unlike Pokemon cards, which sit in the field of play and launch attacks, trainers are action cards that you can play directly from your hand that impact the game in some way. What's unique about the mysterious Fossil Trainer, however, is that when you play it, it comes into play as if it were a 10 hit point Pokemon that can't attack or retreat and doesn't give up a prize card when it gets knocked out. Then, once that fossil has been in play for a turn, you can evolve it just like any other Pokemon. Of the early fossil Pokemon, Aerodactyl was the best one. Its prehistoric power makes it so that no other evolution Pokemon can be played. This paired really well with the big basic Pokemon that were already popular at the time. Now, in your mind, you might think of Aerodactyl as a basic Pokemon, a Pokemon that doesn't evolve from anything. But in the Pokemon TCG, Aerodactyl is categorized as a Stage 1 Pokemon, with its pre-evolution being a fossil. That's because Pokemon decided early on to represent fossil restoration from the video games with evolution in the trading card game. One of the biggest issues with categorizing basic Pokemon as trainer cards, as they have with fossils, is that they can be difficult to get into play. This wasn't so much the case during the earliest days of the Pokemon TCG, since computer search was the primary search card for decks, and computer search can search for anything. But once the game started to move towards Pokemon-specific search cards, fossils got left behind. For instance, trainer cards like Celio's Network, Holland Mentor, and Lynette's Net Search are great for setting up strategies since they search out basic Pokemon, but they cannot get fossils. Many fossil-based strategies have struggled over the years because of this. To try and entice players to get fossil Pokemon into play, the game designers usually give fossil Pokemon cool attacks or strong abilities, but more often than not, the pain of setting up a fossil Pokemon isn't worth the trouble of getting it into play. A common theme for fossil decks is that the best way to get them into play is to ignore the fossil mechanic altogether and cheat them into play using other means. The first example of this is Fossil Egg from Neo Discovery, which is a trainer card that allows you to flip a coin. and if heads, you could search your deck for a Pokemon that evolves from Mysterious Fossil and put it straight onto the bench. This sort of thing ends up being a consistent design choice for the Pokemon Company, since it kind of allows them to ignore how awkward the fossil mechanic is, while still allowing Pokemon that evolve from fossils to see play. In 2003, it almost looked like Pokemon was trying to fix the trainer fossil issue with Buried Fossil from Skyridge, a funky card from one of Pokemon's rarest sets that actually turned the fossils into a 30 hit point basic Pokemon instead of a trainer. It even had a little Pokemon power that lets you search out Kabuto or Ammonite, which made it easier to get them into play. But then, in typical Pokemon fashion, they immediately abandoned that line of thought and printed more traditional trainer fossils starting in the Sandstorm expansion. And this is where some serious problems started to arise. With Root and Claw Fossil, in addition to Unidentified Fossil, Pokemon now had a potential 12 cards that you could play in a deck as Pokemon that didn't give up prize cards, which is a control player's dream scenario. Players started using fossils as prize-denying meat shields for stall strategies like Wailord and Politoed EX. Wailord EX even finished in the top 8 of the 2004 World Championships at the hands of Colin Mall, which is, to this day, the best Worlds finish with a fossil-based deck. And it isn't even really a fossil deck, as none of the cards that evolve from fossils are present in the list. The fossils are only here to die and not give up prize cards while doing it. Clearly not into the idea of fossils being used as meat shields, the design team at Creatures Inc. changed course in the Diamond and Pearl block and made it so that fossils would now give up prize cards when they got knocked out. Fossil Pokemon already weren't seeing play, and this change just made them worse. Then, in the Black and White block, Pokemon did the unthinkable and made fossil Pokemon even worse. In 2011, Creatures completely gave up on the whole trainer-fossil dynamic, and the concept that fossil Pokemon were evolved from fossil trainers. You know, the concept they had been working on for a decade. Now, fossil Pokemon like Aerodactyl had become restored Pokemon, and could only be restored with the effect of their respective item cards, like this old Amber Aerodactyl, which reads, "Look at the bottom 7 cards of your deck. You may reveal an Aerodactyl you find there and put it onto your bench. Shuffle the other cards back into your deck." This is basically Dusk Ball, if Dusk Ball could only retrieve one specific Pokemon. Being forced to play a trainer card that only sometimes finds the Pokemon that you want to get into play was obviously not very good. But Pokemon stuck to their new mechanic for the duration of the Black and White and X and Y blocks, and consequently, nobody played them. Now there was an exception to all of this: Archops. You see, Archops from Noble Victories is pretty good. It's got the same ability as Aerodactyl from the Fossil expansion, which stops all evolution Pokemon from coming into play. Similar to Aerodactyl from Fossil, Archops also released at a time when big basic Pokemon were dominating the Pokemon TCG, so it wasn't worth all the trouble to get it into play. But in expanded format years later, once Maxie's Hidden Ball Trick was released in Primal Clash, competitors started playing Archops with Maxie's to cheat it into play. Maxie's Hidden Ball Trick is a supporter that allows you to put a fighting Pokemon from your discard pile straight onto your bench and draw 5 cards if it's the last card in your hand. This shows that it was actually easier to get Archops into the discard pile and then whittle your hand down to just a single supporter card than it was to evolve a fossil into play the way the game designers intended. The fun didn't last long, however, as both Maxie's and Archops would eventually get banned from expanded format. By the time that Sun and Moon rolled around, the game designers gave up on the terrible Dusk Ball fossil item thing and returned to the good old faithful evolving fossil items. But this time, they simplified the formula and gave fossils some support. Instead of having it so that each fossil Pokemon had their own fossil to evolve from, now all fossil Pokemon evolved from unidentified fossil. This made deck building and card design much more streamlined than it had ever been. Fossil Excavation Map and Pokemon Research Lab were released alongside this new wave of fossils, which clearly aimed to fix fossil Pokemon's unplayability issues, and it still didn't do much. The problem during Sun and Moon was that fossil Pokemon just weren't strong enough to warrant playing. The only one that saw any love was Omastar, which was splashed into big basic decks that played Green's Exploration, a supporter card that easily allowed for players to search out unidentified fossil and rare candy. Omastar's Fossil Bind ability inflicts item lock if the opponent has more Pokemon in play than you do. Gustavo Wada played this combination in his Garchomp and Giratina tag team deck to a top 8 finish at LAIC in 2019. The universal unidentified fossil design philosophy continued through the Sword and Shield block, where we saw the release of the most broken fossil Pokemon of all time, Archops from Silver Tempest. Archops from Silver Tempest will go down in Pokemon history as one of the game's best support Pokemon. Alongside Lugia V-Star, Archops was the centerpiece of so many broken decks and tournament-winning strategies. Its Primal Turbo ability allows you to search your deck for 2 special energy and attach them to one of your Pokemon in play. Archops may be the best Pokemon that evolves from a fossil, but I wouldn't blame you for forgetting that it did. Archops decks never played Archon or Unidentified Fossil, despite the fact that Archops evolves from them. Instead, they use Lugia V-Star's Summoning Star V-Star power to cheat them into play. Summoning Star allows a player to take 2 colorless Pokemon from their discard pile and place them straight onto the bench. Who needs Unidentified Fossil when you can just do that? Archops may have finally broken through and become the first fossil Pokemon to be a supporting pillar of a Tier 1 archetype. But it still didn't feel like a victory for the fossil mechanic, as it was completely ignored during the deck's construction. With the Scarlet and Violet era, Pokemon has abandoned the universal unidentified fossil from the previous 2 blocks, and is returning to specific fossil items, this time branded with the Antique label. And just like they did in the Sun and Moon era with Pokemon Research Lab, they have a new stadium on the way in Pitch Black to try and solve the fossil searchability crisis, Fossil Excavation Site, which allows you to search your deck for 2 trainer cards with the word Antique in their name and put them straight onto your bench. I'm excited for this new era of fossil Pokemon. They seem strong, and with Fossil Excavation Site, they should be easy enough to get into play. My concern is that fossil Pokemon will always play awkwardly with non-fossil Pokemon. If a deck plays Buddy Buddy Poffin, it kinda sucks that you can't use that to search for a fossil, you know? I'm concerned that the new stadium isn't enough of an upside to remove the clunkiness that fossil Pokemon have been trudging through since the beginning. The lack of roll compression with your search cards makes fossil Pokemon a huge investment to put into your deck. So my hope is that the power level of the new fossils is high enough to make the deck investment worth it. Despite being around for 30 years, it still doesn't feel like fossil Pokemon have had their golden era. The best finishing fossil deck of all time, Colin's 2004 Wailord deck, only used fossils to stall for time, and Lugia V-Star is a powerful fossil deck that ignores the fossil mechanic altogether. There are some promising contenders among the new fossil Pokemon releasing in Pitch Black, however, that could mix things up for years to come. Rampardos is a 330 hit point giant whose destructive headbutt ability allows you to remove an energy from the opponent's active Pokemon on a coin flip. I'll use destructive headbutts. Heads.
Hey.
Okay, we're gonna kick the fire off.
Gonna kick it like
Yes. No, I'm gonna headbutt it off.
with your dinosaur legs?
Headbutt it off. Yes. Its Rampaging Hammer attack also ramps to 300 base damage if it's used in succession. With the help of Premium Power Pro, this can lay waste to any Pokemon in the trading card game. Bastiodon is a neat support Pokemon with the Ancient Bulwark ability, which prevents the opponent's Pokemon from dealing damage with attacks if they have 2 or less energy attached. My issue with Bastiodon is that it only works while it's on the bench, so decks can always use boss's orders to bring it up and knock it out uninhibited. The bench limitation clause seems unnecessary and makes this card far less potent than it would be otherwise. Although not a fossil, Relicanth is a new basic Pokemon whose fossil beatdown attack does 10 plus 30 more damage for each of your bench Pokemon with Antique in the name. A potential 160 damage for 1 energy is pretty good, but we all know the vicious things Dragapult would do to those 60 hit point fossils sitting on the bench. Antique Cover Fossil is the only one that has protection from effects of attacks built in, so that's nice. It also evolves into one of the most promising fossil Pokemon this generation, Tortuga from Black Bolt, whose Ancient Seaweed attack does 30 damage for each item card in the opponent's discard pile for 1 water energy. Maybe there's something to be uncovered here. Anyways, I'm curious to hear what you think. Do you think that there is a balance that the game designers can reach with this fossil mechanic? And are you hopeful for this new era of fossil Pokemon to change the narrative around this historically beleaguered mechanic? Let me know in the comments below. If you like this video and want to see more like it, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. If you want to support the channel further, shopping with my sponsors Dragon Shield and Full Grip Games directly supports the content that I create on Tricky Gym. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.